Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Thriving Adoptees podcast. So have we got a treat for you today? We've got a fantastic Nancy McCabe. Nancy, great to see you again and welcome to the show.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. So Nancy is you're an adoptive mum, and you raised, if I remember rightly, you raised your daughter on your own. Yeah.
Yes, right.
You're
single parent of a daughter from China. Yes.
From China, yeah. So one of when Nancy and I spoke last time, we came up with this idea of something to avoid as adoptive parents, and that's imposing our own insecurities on our kids. So that was something that Nancy said in our discussion. Why is that a big deal, do you think, Nancy? Watching out for our own securities and not imposing them on our kids.
Well, I think that's probably a general principle of parenting, whether you're an adoptive parent or not. That
yeah, totally.
It's so easy to read your child's behavior in light of your own your own insecurities, your own doubts, and to have expectations that might be unrealistic of your children. And I think it's very important, especially as an adoptive parent, I think, because I think the issues may be a little bit differently when you're not an adoptive parent, when your children are biologically related to you, in that maybe the temptation is very high to impose a lot of expectations on those children. With an adopted child, you don't have that genetic component where you're like, well, this child must do this or must do that or must look like this or must, be interested in that. And so it's so important to let them be who they are outside of your expectations.
Yeah. So when was the first inkling that you got? When did you first kind of catch on to the importance of this area, Nancy?
I think from the very beginning, because, my daughter, I met her when she was 9 months old. And I've heard this about babies that are younger than that too. But I mean, she very clearly had her own personality, and she was not it would have been such a mistake to try to mold her into something that I wanted her to be, as opposed to seeing who she was. And maybe, again, that's one of the gifts of having a child that's a little bit older, is that you can't entertain illusions about how you're going to mold them.
It's kind of more obvious.
Yeah, it becomes more obvious.
More obvious because the personality is more developed at 9 months old than it is at 9 minutes, I guess.
Right. Yeah. I mean, she was very intense, and she knew what she wanted, and she had very strong feelings, and so and very bright eyes that looked like they were taking in everything, and so there was just no way I was going to try to force her into something that I thought she should be.
Yeah. So was that a surprise to you? Or to what extent was that?
I think to some extent it was, and especially in my case, because I was with a group of parents who were all adopting from China, and so there were 4 babies, I think 3 or 4 babies there were 6 people in the group, but I think only 3 of the babies were from the same orphanage as my daughter. And so the other babies in the group reacted to trauma by withdrawing, and their personalities kind of, got hidden a little bit for the first few days. The first couple of weeks, it took a long time. I mean, I talked to one mom that said that her child didn't really start exhibiting a whole lot of reaction, emotion for a few weeks because she was so traumatized. My daughter had the opposite reaction. She was the only one in the group that was just yelling at the top of her lungs from the very beginning. She was not happy. She was not comfortable. She thought it was weird that I was, this person who she'd never seen was taking her. And so, I did have to adapt to that very quickly, to the fact that this was, and everybody else is like, oh my God, there goes Sophie again, because she would be screaming at the top of her lungs. And so it was a much quicker awakening for me than it was for some of those other parents. Like the one that I talked to a couple years later, she said, a month after I adopted my daughter, she suddenly got really testy and angry and loud, and suddenly started struggling more with adjustment, whereas my daughter did from the very beginning. I mean, they all adjusted very well, but clearly it was a big transition. They were, they'd been somewhere else being taken care of by other people for many months.
Yeah. I heard something as an adoptee that made me really wince in pain last week, which was somebody was talking about when kids are ready to be adopted. And it was somebody that worked in an orphanage. And she said, when they stop crying, they're ready to be adopted. And that really got me for some reason.
Huh.
When yeah, I don't really know why.
Yeah, and I would actually disagree with that quite a bit, because I think that our children who were in orphanages for a long time, my cousin also adopted from China a couple years after I did, and she said that her daughter didn't know that she was allowed to have any desires. She didn't know that she could want anything. And we've been back to that orphanage, the orphanage that my daughter was in, many times. And there's a lot of babies that it's like to see a baby that has given up on life is the most heartbreaking thing on the face of the earth. A baby that does no longer cry or protest or try to get attention, that's a bit, like to give up under the, it's just mind-boggling.
Yeah.
So I think that, honestly, I think that our children, is anybody ever ready to be adopted? Is anybody ever ready to be wrenched out from the life that they know and sent to a different one? Probably not. But at the same time, our children were in understaffed, underfunded orphanages. And so, ideally, if a child is going to be adopted, if they can be adopted from birth, that makes such a difference. I think nobody's ever ready, and they always have to adjust no matter how old they are. But the earlier, the better, from what I know now about brain development.
Yeah. I think you put my feeling into words, very well, when because the fact, the fact that a baby has given up, and that's the right timeline. It's still sending spirit. What do they say? It's sending chills down my spine. What you've talked a lot about you mentioned kind of you've talked about doubt, insecurities, and expectations, and what doubts, insecurities, and expectations came to the surface in those early days, weeks, months?
When I went into it, and as a single parent, I didn't know if I was prepared. I hadn't spent a lot of time around babies. I wasn't sure that I had a lot of maternal instincts. But I knew I wanted to raise a child. And so for me, excuse me, my voice, I did not trust my own instincts, because I didn't know if I had any. And so for me, that was a really big thing, like realizing, what, if I pay close attention to what she needs, I know what to do. And it was a big revelation for me when I was in China, even, because when she came to me, she was sick. She was not only fussy, but she was genuinely, she had eczema, her face was all red. She was having digestive issues. And I finally said, you know what? Because when I met her, she was on milk formula. But later I realized that probably that's something, that's something that that Chinese orphanages do when Americans are adopting babies in particular, because Americans have this really weird idea that milk is sort of the cure-all, and that, you know, everybody must drink lots of milk. And so I think that these babies were put on milk formula only days before they met us. So my daughter, she can't hold down food. She's got bright red cheeks. I finally said, you know what? I think I'm going to take her off milk formula. I want to see what happens, because she might be allergic to milk. She might be lactose intolerant. And my cousin was kind of put out with me because she had already made up several bottles. She said, can't you wait? And I'm like, no, let's just give this a try. And I put her on soy formula, and it immediately all cleared up, and she was fine. And I was like, and I was criticized by our facilitator. She said, oh no, she must have milk. And I was just like, no, I'm going to try this. And then, you know, I realized I was right and everybody else was not. I knew already I could read this child's signals better than anybody else. And so I needed to trust myself. And, you know, I think that was always a struggle, is, you know, even after that, throughout the years, was just figuring out how to trust myself and my own instincts, to do the best I could for my child.
Yeah. Fascinating. I mean, to me, you know, you said I couldn't trust my own instincts because I didn't know if I had any.
Yeah.
And it's like that sounds kind of, it sounds like a bad thing, really. But what it actually meant was that you were totally open. It was that it was you weren't bringing your preconceptions.
Yeah.
You were open. You were kind of curious. You knew that you didn't know what you didn't know.
Right. And I hope so. I would like to read it that way. You know, years later, when my daughter was very sick in her teens, I finally had her tested for food allergies, and she was allergic to milk. And I thought, oh my gosh, I recognized this when I first met her. And I did not give her milk products for years, but then eventually, you know, she grew up in the US, milk is forced on kids all the time. That's all they have to drink in the schools. And so we just sort of forgot about it. It turned out she wasn't lactose intolerant, but she was allergic to milk.
Right.
And so, you know, that was one of many of a constellation of problems that she was dealing with, is that she was still ingesting milk products and she couldn't process them.
Yeah.
But I was like, oh my gosh, like I knew this when she was young, and yet I've kind of forgotten and not trusted myself over the years. And now I have to go back to recognizing that I do know.
Yeah. So it seems to me that it was wisdom or an insight or a gut feel or something that she's got eczema, she's looking red, she can't. What might it be? And it was almost as if it was some kind of idea from the back of your brain. It was something popped up because you were open.
Yeah, you know, I think, I mean, many times over the years, I had occasions to realize that we often know what we don't realize we know. When my daughter was 5, 2 Thanksgivings in a row, she got so severely dehydrated. The first Thanksgiving, she had an asthma attack and was dehydrated and ended up in the emergency room for 11 hours, you know, before they could get her asthma under control.
Wow.
Next year, we were visiting a friend at Thanksgiving, and I was the one that cleared the table after dinner. I said, hey, let me do the dishes here. So I took all the dishes into the kitchen, and I kept thinking, there is something I need to, like in the back of my head, it's just this twinge. It was like, there's something I should be paying attention to here, but I don't know what it is. And I didn't think about it consciously, but I did the dishes. The next morning, my daughter woke up and she was really sick. She couldn't move. And I was like, oh, I think she's dehydrated. And then I had the memory of clearing the table and clearing a full water glass from the kids' table. I realized she hadn't drunk a thing the day before. And so it was another reminder that, if you pay attention, everything is out there for you to figure out. You just have to pay attention. It
Yeah.
almost felt psychic, but it wasn't psychic. It was a matter of attention to detail.
Yeah. So do you think, she didn't like drinking stuff? She didn't like drinking liquids.
Well,
So,
I think what happened is we were away from home and she was so excited playing with these other kids and she just
right, she
didn't,
forgot.
and that happens to a lot of people. They get dehydrated because they're just distracted and they don't think to drink.
Yeah.
And she didn't feel consciously thirsty. So I think that was what it was. Because normally at home, this wasn't an issue, but away from home, I knew to watch for it.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. So we've talked about doubts, insecurities, and expectations. So could you talk into the expectations for me, Nancy?
Oh, that's such a tough one, especially these days, because parenting is such a competitive sport. Everybody has all these expectations for their kids. And I had a really hard time because I'm a competitive person and I was like a really good student. And, so I just noticed from a very young age, it was just always like my kid's making straight A's and my kid is, great at this and great at that. And I had to really, I think this is all parents. I don't think this is just about adoption, obviously,
No.
but I had to really work on restraining myself and learning to, again, and I'm not sure I was always successful, but to pay attention to what she wanted and needed and what she was good at and what she cared about. And she was a very good student, but she didn't handle pressure very well. And so she would kind of tank on tests and so I really had to learn to temper my expectations and to really look at school and put it in perspective that making straight A's doesn't mean that you're smart and not making good grades doesn't mean that you're dumb. There are lots of really, really intelligent people who don't make good grades. And there's a lot of people that are really good at conforming and being conventional who make very good grades. So I really had to work at putting those things in perspective. My daughter was a gymnast, and so I really enjoyed watching that. But again, when she competed for a year when she was 8, and then she didn't want to do it anymore. And so I was disappointed, because I had enjoyed that, but I was like, yeah, okay, you can go back someday if you want to. And then she actually did choose to go back on her own when she was 10, and she competed again for another 6 years.
Wow.
And but it's really hard, like sports parents, it's really hard not to impose. If she didn't do well in a meet, then I had to learn to just, not talk about it. She didn't need to talk about it all the time. Or if she did well, she didn't need to talk about it all the time. It was just like matter of fact, like, that's great. Let's go do something else now.
Yeah.
And this is definitely an issue with parenting across the board. But when a child is adopted, I think they do sometimes have, they're so worried about pleasing their parents, and they're worried about, in my daughter's case, I think it was important to her to be publicly this perfect child so that people wouldn't criticize her, so that people wouldn't say those kinds of stereotypical things like, well, Nancy's not her real mom, so they don't really have a bond. And she, we heard stuff like that a lot. So there was that additional pressure to achieve and behave. And so I tried to be aware of that and do my best not to put too much pressure on her in that regard.
Yeah. Me and my wife haven't got any kids. So I really smiled at because obviously we have friends that do. but the parenting as a competitive sport, parenting, I thought that's, I could see that brought a smile to my face. I think there's a cultural thing's coming clearer to me recently in terms of how it just seems to me that Americans are a little bit more direct than British people. So
yeah.
I don't, as you said, what you just said, we heard a lot of that, not a real mum and stuff like that. And I'm thinking, would that happen in the UK? And I really don't know, but I have a gut sense that it would happen less, perhaps. Not, it would never happen, but it would be a little bit less. So have I heard much of that? Not
Yeah.
really. I'm as a kid.
Right.
Well, I was white kid adopted by white folks, so I'm not going to have the same. It's not going to be as obvious at all,
Right.
So I want to take you back onto working on restraining yourself. You said working on restraining yourself, and I thought that's one of those things that we we'll say that sort of stuff, but what does that mean? What does working on restraining ourselves, like, what does that look like? What's it about?
Well, I mean, I learned very quickly that it meant not making too big a deal about grades, which is hard because it's something that I always cared about as a kid, and I've got a PhD. I went through school. I cared about doing well, and I had to learn not to make a big deal about that. She did very well. I mean, it wasn't like she was doing poorly or anything, but she did, like, you could tell she felt really intense pressure a lot of the time.
Yeah.
And it wasn't effortless for her because she felt so much stress. Some kids, school was really effortless for, and also just not comparing us because we're very different people. Like, we have a lot in common. We think alike in many ways, but what we value may be a little bit different. Recently, she told me in this very apologetic way, "Mom, I don't think I'm ever going to go to grad school." And I just laughed, and I'm like, yeah, I mean, it's not for everybody. And I don't see you thriving in grad school because, she's very smart. She likes what she's doing. I think that the pressure would be very difficult for her. And again, you got to separate the idea of intelligence from other personality characteristics. Like, I mean, I do believe that her difficulty in dealing with stress stems directly from her infancy. And she has to make choices to handle that as best she can. But and if she were somebody who were highly academic, and it was like that was the one thing that was holding her back from going to grad school was that she gets too stressed, then certainly we would talk about resources for dealing with that. But I just think that she's happy the way she is, and that it's important for me, as a parent of an adult now, to just be proud of who she is and what she does, and not, you miss so much if you want things that aren't there, if you spend a lot of time like, I wish she were this way, or I wish she were that way. And then you miss what really is. And I noticed that when she was a teenager, when other parents would talk about their kids and their kids' talents and their kids' grades, and I'm like, if we're imposing so many expectations on them, are we missing their actual strengths? Are we missing what they really do well? There's also, and I don't know if this is an American thing or not, but there's like such an emphasis on never quitting. Like, if you start something, you should not quit. You should carry it through. And there's, the culture, especially where we live in this small town, there is such disapproval about not, like, if you join the gymnastics team, you should never quit. If you sign up for track and field, you can't quit. If you, and I'm like, you know what? I got to where I am in my own life by quitting things that I didn't care about. If you try things, and if they don't work for you, you quit. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. That's not a personality flaw. It's a way to find what you love.
Yeah.
And so I saw a lot of parents forcing their children to stay with things that the children didn't really care about. It's like, if my daughter hadn't quit gymnastics eventually, she wouldn't have discovered her love of politics and travel, which they're huge passions of hers. You know, she wouldn't have put so much time into those things. So I think anytime that we want not just our children, but other people in our lives to be different than what they are, we're missing who they really are. And we're missing a source of great richness in discovering this person.
Yeah. And we're going to get frustrated ourselves.
Yes. I mean, yeah, absolutely.
It's some Buddhist thing, isn't it? You know, whatever. Arguing with what is it? I think arguing, you know, resisting what is, you know, like bending with the breeze, you know. The quitting thing. Was it you? I had this conversation about quitting with somebody, and I said that I felt that sometimes I stick with things for too long. So I don't change path. So I'm not talking about the end goal. I'm talking about the strategy. Yeah. So I stick with the strategy for too long. I think I sometimes do that. I'm not. I don't change course. I'm not talking about the end goal, but the and somebody said I was sharing that. She said, "Oh, that's to do with adoption." And that wasn't you that said that, was it? No,
I don't think so.
no, I don't think so. I don't think so. And I thought, and I went straight to, no, it's got nothing to do with adoption. That maybe that's got nothing to do with that. And
you know, I do think that children who are adopted feel a larger pressure to prove themselves. You know, they feel a greater pressure to show that they are model children, that they stick with things, that they achieve things, and that was part of the reason I felt like I had to back off on my daughter, because I think that other people's kids didn't feel like they had to somehow earn their place in the world. And adopted children, and especially, of course, in the case of a child that doesn't look like their parents, so everybody knows they're adopted, and they, you know, they feel a pressure to earn their place in the world. They feel a pressure to be grateful every day. And we all should be grateful every day, but like to put that additional pressure on children just because they're adopted, to say that an adopted child should be more grateful than a non-adopted child, it's the other way around. I mean, it's children that you know, were born in a family and grew up in that family, in a loving family, and never had the trauma of a child that was ripped from their roots. Those are the children that should be more grateful, not our children because they were adopted. Like that implies that there's something flawed about our children, and that you know, oh, we were so saintly and that we, you know, overlooked those flaws and took them in. And that's like completely wrong, because honestly, as we're the ones that should be grateful that we get to raise these children.
Yeah.
So
fascinating.
But I do think what you said, I mean, we should all teach our children how to change course. We don't talk about that enough. We talk too much about not quitting instead of how to quit and move on to something else.
Yeah. When that person said that to me, I thought, no, that me not changing course has got nothing to do with adoption.
Yeah.
And there is a big difference between changing course and changing destination, right? And yourself, the three, there must be three completely different things. Oh, they seem to be to me. They seem to be to me. But as soon as I thought to myself, don't discount that, Simon, another thought came in and said, yeah, sorry, discount it. You know, sorry, the first thought was, I don't agree with you, you're wrong. And then my next thought was, hold on a minute, maybe it's worth mulling over. You know, just give it a little bit of time and see if you change your opinion on her opinion, right? And on this occasion, it didn't. I did have something. Yeah, something else happened. Anything to do with that. On Friday, I had a decision to make, and I was kind of a bit cheesed off with another person, and then I thought, hold on a minute, and and suddenly my decision, my thought about the other person changed completely. I had compassion for her, and therefore I changed my decision. And openness, I think, is, well, for me, it's something that I could do with a bit more of, which is why I was kind of, perhaps half an hour or so ago, I was talking about, I was reveling in your openness about your daughter, because that's something that I'd like to demonstrate a little bit more often, is openness. The bigger point that you make about kids having to earn their place, adoptees having to earn their place in the world. Was there a moment when you saw that in your daughter?
Yeah, she was just such like, privately, she was especially in her early years, she was very tempestuous. I mean, she was very emotional. She was, and again, it I think stemmed from her early trauma, but in public, she was a model child. And so by the time she came home from being in public, at any point, it was like she was about ready to burst, because she had held so much in all the time. And I especially noticed one time she was maybe about 12, and we went to some event with some other families, and we all stopped for ice cream afterwards, and she just suddenly burst forth. Like, she was, I don't remember what she said, but I think she burst forth with some profanity or something, and everybody's like, whoa. And I was like, I think for me, this is a sign that she just is always holding so much in that sometimes she just can't do it anymore. So that was a really, I mean, I noticed it all along, but I think that was a really big turning point moment where I was like, yeah, she's really struggling, because she has to suppress so much.
And did she become aware of that herself? Did you point it out, or did you, what did you do? What was the story?
Yeah, no, I think that she became, as she hit adolescence, she became less of a model person in public, because
Okay.
she was much more politically engaged. She is a very committed feminist, and she spoke up about things, and she stopped holding things in. But then she was always getting in trouble, because if a guy, one time a guy called her, like, a bunch of kids at school were calling her chink, and she called a guy an asshole after he called her that, and she's the one that got in trouble at school. And it was just like, so basically we had a conversation, we had ongoing conversation at home about that, and about when you take the risk of getting in trouble and when you don't, and her knowing that I would support her choices in that regard. It's really funny though, because I think that she struggled a lot with those issues. She probably still does to some extent, but maybe not as much. But she's in her first really serious relationship right now, and she's learned that, because she was an only child of a single mom, and so I don't think it quite penetrated, but she's learned, like, you have to be nice to people. Not that she wasn't, but that she would have her snarky moments, and now she's like, that hurts people's feelings. And she's so mature, and she's so good at recognizing now that, okay, I've got to learn to curb that. I don't want to hurt people's feelings. I have a friend who, her name is Lori Tequila, and she wrote a book about, she was adopted as a baby, and she's written several books, but one of her, a recent memoir, I'm trying to remember the title. It's
Eh?
anyway, it's got a very complicated title, but she writes about how adopted children often don't realize that they can have an effect on other people. That children who spent time in orphanages, for instance, who didn't get their needs met, don't think that other people will respond to them. So they can be really mean to other people. They can be, because they just assume that they're not going to be heard and nobody's going to care. And I thought that was a really important insight, because I saw that in my daughter, that, you know, and of course I was the person that she took it out on, because I was the safe person. One time I asked her when she was little, why do you talk to me like that? And she said, because I know you'll love me. I know you'll love me anyway. And that was true, you know,
Wow.
but
Wow.
but it really took maturity for her to figure out how to start dealing with that, and how to and to really understand the importance of being kind to other people always. You know, I'm not, I mean, you know, none of us ever achieve that completely, but I see it in her. It's so rewarding to see, just in the last few years,
Yeah.
how she's processed that.
Yeah. Fascinating. And oh, I've remembered something that I was going to talk about earlier on, that it came back. It's come back around again. Yeah, I was thinking about my I was thinking about my cousins, actually. So my mum was the eldest of 4 daughters, and my dad was an only child. So so there's me and my sister, and then the second eldest daughter, one of my aunts, Auntie Kathleen. We call her A Kathleen. She signs her cards A Kathleen. It's just UNT. It's just another. It's only 3 extra letters to put in. You know, like she's putting a full stop. A. No, she's got 4 kids, and I remember thinking about how bigger families kind of the kids sort themselves out a little bit more. They've got more. There's more opportunities to learn the outcomes of not being kind.
Right. Yes.
if you've got 3 siblings, and so there's something that I was going to ask you about, was this perennial problem, or seems to be perennial problem, behavior. Let's call it behavior. So something happens. I think to myself, is that because I'm adopted? Your daughter says something. You say, is that because she's adopted? So this what do they call it? You know, finding the root cause. You know, looking for the causation. And it strikes me that sometimes that can be a complete rabbit hole.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. But, you know, and of course with her, you have the complication of her being the only one of very few Asian children in a very white community, and dealing with a lot of subtle racism. And so, you know, you're always asking the question, is this racism or not? And that also is a rabbit hole, because it is sometimes, but sometimes maybe it's not. But the thing is that, you know, racism is a system. It's not like necessarily a characteristic that people have. It's just a system that we support. Whether we want to or not, we do it subconsciously. So, like, you know, it was very hard to sort out why certain things happened. Or
so I mean, when I get on, I haven't meant this subject hasn't come up in a podcast for a few months, but I think the last time that we talked about it, you know, is this an adoption issue or is this a human issue? Essentially, that's the question. I think I had some wisdom came to me in the moment. Like, does it matter? You know, do we just deal with it? So I think I'll explain. I'll try this and see what you come up with, because I'm interested in your take on this. We're flipping it slightly around. Yeah. So I didn't feel that I needed to earn my place in the world. Right, that wouldn't be a thing I would say yes. You know, if that was on a multiple choice question, have you ever felt that? No. Okay, so but the closest thing that I would have to that would be, you know, I felt that I needed to make my mum and dad's family business a success when I took over.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so it's similar kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
So I talked about this sometimes, but not a lot. And sometimes people think I'm a little bit weird for this, right? So I think it's a little bit weird talking. So we're talking about adoption here, and I say to people, actually, business has caused me far more emotional heartache than adoption in the span of my 55 years. So when I wasn't, and I didn't think I was good enough at business, essentially. So if I'm not good enough at business, then I can develop some new skills, right? So whether that's emotional intelligence with staff, emotional intelligence with clients, business strategy, product development, marketing, you know, like the list goes on and on and on. But, you know, Simon says, I'm bad at business. I need to get better. I need to do some work. I need to get a coach. I need to read more. You know, it really goes on and on. I've said that twice now. Okay. So, but then when I thought that there was something wrong with me because I was adopted, which was an idea that kind of came into my head every now and again, I couldn't do anything about that. So I'm primarily wounded. You know, there's nothing I can do. You know, if you're primarily wounded, you can never be whole again. So that's really disempowered. So the empowered sorry, I never swear on this. The empowered bad businessman can get better, but the unlovable, primarily wounded adoptee can't be whole, and therefore is destined to a life of no better than where I am now.
Yeah. I you know, I've come to see that whole idea of the primal wound very differently in the last few years. Because when my daughter was little, I was like, what's that? I mean, you know, it didn't make any sense to me. I just could not. But now I think that it was an early way of formulating the idea that that children who, sorry,
The dogs come on the Zoom.
yes, okay, all right.
Hey, we haven't had a dog on the Zoom for ages.
Well, she may have to go out of the room because she's going to be obnoxious here. So I think that the idea of the primal wound was an early way of talking about the neuroscience of a neglected child. And can you hang on 1 minute? I'm going to put her out of the room because she's
Sure.
going to be annoying. Here.
Hi, we're back again. The canine problem has the interloper, the canine interloper has now left the room. Nancy, you were saying primal wound.
Yeah. So I'm not going to say that I'm an authority on this, so I'm just talking off the top of my head here. But I also did not understand what attachment issues meant when my daughter was little, because she was very attached to me from the very beginning. And people would say, well, you know, over attachment is a sign of attachment issues. And I'd be like, well, no.
You can't win.
But
You can't
I don't
win.
think they were wrong. I don't think they were wrong. Because
Oh.
attachment issues don't mean that you aren't attached to your parent or you can't attach to people, but it means that you may be, you know, you may have anxious attachment. You may, you know, she grabbed hold of my shirt on the second day that I had her, and she did not let go for a week. So, you know, I recently unearthed the video of me arriving at the Kansas City airport with my daughter and she met my parents for the first time. My dad was recording it, and I posted that on Facebook, and my daughter looked at it and made some comment about it. And I said, have you noticed the fact that your fist is clutching my sweatshirt and it never lets go that entire video? So she was anxiously attached. We always had a very strong bond. I couldn't quite understand how, like, just the fact of being removed from your early circumstances could create this primal wound. But now I really think that that's a way of talking about the fact that, and this may not be as big of an issue. Some people claim that it is, even for babies that are adopted from birth, that the mother's stress, the birth mother's stress during pregnancy can hormonally affect the child. But I know that in the case of my daughter, who was in an orphanage for 9 months, that in fact, that experience, any experience of neglect during the first 2 years of your life, an extended experience, does affect your brain chemistry. It affects the way you're able to process, literally the way you process stress. When you don't have a caregiver who connects with you regularly and responds to your needs, you literally don't learn how to, your brain does not develop the ability to process stress in the way that it would if you had that ongoing bond with somebody. And so to me, that's what that means. And it doesn't mean, and I think that when we can look at it in the light of neuroscientific discoveries in the lab, I mean, that's really research that is relatively new. But we can look at it in that light. We can also understand that it's not something that you're stuck with forever. I mean, it is something that you cope with, like you have to learn coping mechanisms. But it doesn't mean that you're doomed. It doesn't mean that your whole life is completely screwed up.
Yeah. So this area is my fascination. A whole fascination, and it's highly all the psychology and the behavior and all that stuff is highly complex. My take on it is far more simplistic, and it will probably drive somebody with a PhD slightly bonkers. We how shall I put this? Yeah, people say to me, "Oh, you seem very positive, Simon." And I say, "Yes, I am," and that's the reason. The reason is that that I'm positive is because we are not our trauma. We are not our trauma. We simply are not our trauma. So all this fascination with behavior, all this fascination with feelings, all this fascination with thoughts, all this fascination, attachment, womb stuff. Oh, none of that is who we are. And the only way I can sum this up eloquently is somebody else's quote, and I use it all the time. We are not human beings having a spiritual experience. We're spiritual beings having a human experience. We are spiritual beings having a human experience. All the complexity, all the feelings, all the trauma, is in the human experience, right? And that's where the tough stuff is, and that's where we're all fixated. We're all fixated in that, and we're not fixated on the spiritual essence of who we are, the ghost in the machine, the chi, the life force, that stuff. Underneath everything we've been through, every behavior we've displayed, every feeling we've felt, every thought we've felt, is the truth of who we are, that spiritual essence, and that diamond in the I use the fist. You talked about your daughter's clenched fist. I don't know if you've heard me saying this. I do use this metaphor quite a lot on the podcast. So I'm holding up a fist. Sorry, listeners, if you heard me do this before, but it never ceases to fascinate me. The fist, I'm holding the fist up to the screen on this Zoom that I'm doing the recording with Nancy. The fist recommends trauma. Sorry, the fist is the metaphor for trauma. And underneath that metaphor for the, underneath that fist, if I open my fist out, I'm showing Nancy a glass diamond. And the diamond is the metaphor for the spiritual essence of who we truly are, our true identity, not woo-woo spiritual stuff, like who we truly are. Some people, some neuroscientists call this consciousness or awareness. And that awareness, that diamond can't be wounded because diamonds can't be scratched. That spiritual essence can't actually be damaged because it's not a thing. And that's what makes it so nuts, because we can't find the thing. We can't find the spirit that who we truly are, because it's not a thing. It's not a material thing. So
yeah, and I agree with, I like what you're saying on the one hand. And I do want to clarify that my PhD is in creative writing, so it's not in anything related to science. I do have a lot of experience with psychology, but I'm frustrated with it to some extent, or the way that we conceive of psychology, because I think that what we're talking about is actual physiological stuff. It's not just, I think it's bizarre in the US, for instance, we have a separation between what we call behavioral services and medical services. And it's all medical. I mean, it's all physiological. There's been so much research that shows that it's all physiological, that behavior comes from physiological things. And so I so agree with what you're saying, but at the same time, for many adopted children, especially who have been in orphanages, or many children who've been in conditions of neglect or abuse in their early lives, it can become an impediment. That the interruption in their brain development can become an impediment later in their life. And so it's really important to recognize that and deal with it. Like, my daughter became ill. She became ill for several years. She didn't get out of bed. She didn't go to school. And some of it was allergies. We've uncovered a lot of reasons for it. And it was related to food allergies, but it was also related to her inability to process stress. And she was going to school every day, in a school where she was hearing constant comments about her race and her origins. And she really just struggled with the whole stress thing.
Yeah.
What we discovered, though, is that once she became aware of that, she can deal with it a lot better. She's like, oh, when I get stressed, I do this. When I get stressed, I do that. So I don't have to react that way. I can learn to find other ways to react. Traveling, she traveled a lot, and I watched travel. It was amazing watching how that rewired her brain. The way that ordinary stresses didn't kick in the same way when she traveled. The way she became this authoritative person who had to figure stuff out, and that helped her, I think, to get command over her whole life. So I agree largely with what you're saying, but I also think that we have to recognize that these can be issues, and that there are ways to actually address them so that they don't interfere with your whole life, the rest of your life.
So I didn't put what I said very well. I believe that we should be trauma informed.
Yeah.
And hope obsessed. I believe that we are hope obsessed. I believe that we've become trauma obsessed.
Yeah.
And we need to understand clearly all the physiologically, all the feelings, all the thoughts, we need to pay some attention to all this stuff. But what's helped me most in my life has been focusing on who I am.
Yeah, right. Absolutely.
Not my feelings. We've become, as one of my mentors says, we've become emotophobic. You don't have a problem, you have feelings. We're trying to push away. We're fighting what is. We're trying to fight our feelings, and that's what the Western world does.
Well, and there may be some gender differences in the way we think about this, and there may be some cultural differences in the way we think about this, that, because as a creative writer, I think our feelings are pretty important. But I also have many students who sometimes can't get beyond that to really tell the story in a way that will move other people because they're so. But I hosted a writer last week on my campus who escaped Rwanda as a child during the massacre.
Tutsis and the Hutus, yeah.
And she's written a book about it, and she
Wow.
came and spoke on our campus, and one thing that was, she's in her early 30s, and one thing that was very visible is that she's still very traumatized, that's never going to go away. She witnessed something, she experienced something that's never going to not be over. So it put trauma in a different perspective for me, seeing that. But at the same time, I mean, I don't disagree with you. I think that we may think of it a little bit differently, but I think that, yeah, I mean, there's some point that we have to also focus on, write about. I teach creative writing. I have a lot of students writing about trauma, and I think that we got to push past that and see what else, we figure out. There's other things that we can write about and think about too.
So
That might put it in perspective. If we focus too tightly on one thing, it becomes so big. But if we're able to put it in perspective, in the larger perspective of our lives, which I think is kind of what you're saying, it becomes we can manage it. It's not as big of a thing.
So I don't think it's a managing thing. I think it's a seeing thing, generally speaking. So you and I'm going to kind of hopefully point some evidence, some of what you said, back it as evidence of this, right? So your daughter had these challenges, and then she brought them out into the open, and they ceased to become such big things, right? Yeah. So when it's hidden away, right? So that's one thing, right? So for me, I talk about like trauma like a snowball. So we bring it out into the sunshine where we can have a look at it, and it melts, and we see the trauma was made of thoughts and feelings.
Yeah.
And so that's what happens. That's what happened to your daughter. I think what happens to me through writing, and what a lot of writers say to me, they say that writing is therapeutic. They've got some stuff in their subconscious, they bring it up into the conscious by writing about it, and they see that, in a how shall I put this? In a very childlike way, in a very childlike and perhaps oversimplistic way, they see that there isn't a bogeyman under the bed, right? Mm. He's not there. The ghost in their subconscious is revealed to be nothing, and that's what writers do. That. For me, I mean, I've heard stuff about. I've read a book about the Rwandan, the Hutus and the Tutsis, and I've seen TV shows about it, and that will stay with people for the rest of their lives, but it's not who they are.
Right, and that she was a very inspiring speaker in many ways, because she has embraced ways of looking at her life in positive ways, of helping other people, of, she talked a lot about her meditation practice, and she's figured out ways to I mean, yeah, it's always going to stay with her, but that's not the sum total of who she is or what her life is about.
It's not her, yeah. And that's just my own sense. So when I realized that I wasn't fundamentally, when I realized that human beings are fundamentally unwoundable, right?
Yeah,
like, not as just a nice idea, a throwaway line that some slightly wacko bloke going against the whole of the adoption world, right? When I realized that we are all whole, despite the horrible feelings that we feel, when I realized that we are all fundamentally unwoundable underneath the SH1T that we've been through, that just changed my world. So,
right.
It's the separation. We are not our trauma. It still came back to me. I had something last week, actually. I realized I was pushing away. I realized that I was sometimes I was ashamed of my trauma because I thought the trauma was who I am. And then I thought, that's nuts. And then that's another little insight that takes me further along. But yeah, I'm writing my book. I'm writing my book at the moment. I'm planning my book. And the title is Whole. The title is Whole.
Yeah.
Because there are some people out there in mentoring other adoptees who are telling them that they can never be whole. And that is scary stuff for me. These people shouldn't be mentoring others.
I teach a lot of courses on the connection between writing and healing. And there's a lot of really interesting research on that. And I do think it's really important I deal with mostly, not exclusively, but mostly women writers who have some kind of trauma in their past. And I think it's very important to bring that out into the light and look at it and understand it and figure it out, put it in perspective. And then I think at some point, then you're like, okay, now I'm ready to write about something else. I'm ready to think about something else. I'm ready to move on to something else. And I think it's so important to get to that point. Yeah. But I think you have to go, you have to go through it, not around it, to get there.
Yeah. Well, I've been going through it for years or so now. So, like this is deep stuff, right? Yeah. Nancy, I want to thank you. And I want to tell the listeners to check out Nancy's books, because she's written 2 books about her daughter. There's links in the show notes. This is a very bright lady, and to raise 1 kid on her own and all that sort of stuff. Sorry, I hope that's not patronizing.
Oh, no. But may I also mention, I remembered Lori Jaquila's book, and it's called Belief is Its Own Kind of Truth, Maybe. And it's about her own experience as an adoptee and finding her birth family. Okay. So I really recommend that too.
We'll put a link in that as well. And Nancy, thank you very much for coming on. And we'll speak to you again very soon. Thank you, listeners.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you so much. Bye.